Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing 4 Visions by the band Eskaton.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
Now, this is a very interesting Zeuhl album originating from France, the same place where Magma originated from, and I was definitely not expecting anything from this album the way it went out, so my way to share this with you is with some of my favorite bits from this album. So this is 4 Visions by the French band Eskaton, released in 1981. This might be the quintessential Zeuhl album. Now it's kind of funny to say that because most people know Magma as being the best, the most well-known, the most critically acclaimed Zeuhl album of all time. They are, after all, the creators of this subgenre, but as it seems in retrospective, a lot of people rate this specific album today as being better than any of Magma's works. And while Eskaton might not have the same range of success as Magma, they've created this album which is considered as a Zeuhl masterpiece. And you know what? I kinda get it. A few days ago we reviewed MDK being Mechanic Destructive Commando by Magma on this channel, and this specific album is known to be their most critically acclaimed album that there is. And the thing is, I gave it an 8 out of 10, said that it was good, at some points it was great, but honestly I don't really think it nears perfection. But you see, today's album is kinda different from that. It's actually quite different from that. And Eskaton themselves, they've approached Zeuhl in a different way than Magma, and I think that's what made this album, at least in my opinion, quite better. So firstly, and maybe most notably, is the fact that they're singing here in French and not in the made-up language of Kobean. Now, why is that important? Well, singing in French, although I am not a French speaker myself, really does help to connect me to the music and put it down to earth in some way. The thing is, I was listening to this, and although it all sounding like some sort of gibberish to me, I could have plucked out things that sounded familiar, or at least had sounds which I already somewhere knew myself. Secondly, this album is great for being very nuanced, and especially that comes with the vocals themselves. As it is known with bands like Magma or Koenji Hayake, they use vocals in a very obtrusive and very repetitive way, and the thing that I really liked about this album in particular is the fact that it only used the vocals when they're needed, to the certain extent that they're needed, and not stretching them too far along to the point where they become mildly annoying. And yes, the idea of utilizing vocals and singing in some sort of instrument is still existent on here, but it is much more subtle, much more fine, and much more fitting to the music overall. And thirdly, and maybe most critically about this album, is the fact that whenever I think about Zeuhl music, at least when I was experiencing up until this point was that Zeuhl music doesn't really know when to take the chill pill, when to relax, when to calm down, where to do some quiet parts. And the thing is that we listened on MDK, there were certain parts that were close to being that, but honestly there were some glimpses of that and no more, and I was starting to wonder myself, what might a Zeuhl album that was calmer in nature sound like? And little did I know back then that in a few days an album like that would arise. And this is this album today. This is For Visions. This is what makes it great. It is a calmer version of Zeuhl. It's still very interesting, very enticing, very fun to listen to, but it isn't so over the top. And you know, it's really nice because I've seen the progress I had with Zeuhl myself. So I started off with Koenji Hayake. I was blown away by it. I didn't know what to think of it. It was so over the top in many ways. And then we gave a listen to KA, which was basically the pinnacle of that specific thing, just being too loud, too obtrusive, too everything at the same time, and I did not like that. That was like hard for me to listen to. Then we listened to Udu Voodoo, which, you know, toned down a bit, was more fun in a way, and wasn't so loud and obnoxious in many ways. And then we listened to MDK, which was definitely more subtle than them all, but today we're listening to what is probably the chillest, quietest, you know, calmest Zeuhl album I listened to up until now, and I had a blast. So this album opens up with the same name of the band itself, called Eskaton. Now this track is basically exemplifying everything I told you so far. It is so nice to listen to, definitely a perfect song, like without a shadow of a doubt this was a perfect listening, and what I really liked about it is the fact that I could connect to it on a more personal level, emotional level, and I genuinely had fun when listening to it. And my criticism of it isn't objective, isn't because I'm doing the review, it's just because I had a great time listening to it and I appreciated it highly. And you know, this track is a bit rough around the edges, but it does feel like it was done in some intentional way, and honestly it just adds to the charm of it. Another thing I really liked about it is the Hammond organ. I think that it adds a lot of great textures to this song in particular and the entire album as a whole, and seeing as this album came out in 1981, it really does hinder back to the golden age of prog in the early 70s, which I really liked. Another thing which I really loved is the drumming. It's very innovative, very interesting all the time. It's actually pretty bombastic, but it isn't obtrusive and it's not stealing the spotlight, much like a lot of albums do. And one of the things I'm really enjoying about this album, like really to a point of I can't even describe how much I enjoy this, is the fact that Eskaton are not afraid to utilize an electric guitar. I don't know what it is with Zeuhl bands, but they just don't really like using an electric guitar, or at least not in a way that is overly present. But here we have some really lovely guitar solos on here. They might be tiny, they might be, you know, simple, but they're really nice to listen to, and the guitar itself adds a lot of depth to this entire album. And honestly, I wish each and every Zeuhl album would utilize this better and, you know, create this some sort of bridge from contemporary prog to the Zeuhl subgenre. And you know, after finding this 10 out of 10 track in the beginning, I was really starting to think that yeah, it cannot stay this perfect, and I was ready to be disappointed, but boy was I wrong. The next track is called Attente or Attente. I'm not entirely sure what it means. I actually didn't go and do the ways of translating as I usually do, but this track is definitely the more synthesized one, the more electronic one, and I honestly really like it. It adds this really nice contrast from the first track to this second track, and in addition with some very interesting jazz influences, I think that this one was a treat to listen to. Here the vocals really shined, and although they were pretty great in the first track, here they were really shining. And if I didn't mention this so far, the vocalist, the main vocalist, the lead vocalist is actually female. So unlike Magma, which they have Christian Vander doing his fantastic vocal work, here we have a female doing the lead vocals and the backing vocals, and honestly I couldn't ask for something any better. Another thing which is present amongst this entire album, but here I noticed it for the first time like really substantially, is the bass line, the bass sound. Everything about the bass is so perfect on here. I love it for it. I can honestly listen to this entire album with the bass only isolated and I'd have a fantastic time. And by the way, if you don't know this album already, you should really go ahead and check it out. Like if you're looking to get into Zeuhl and you don't really understand Zeuhl and you somehow happen to not listen to this album quite yet, I highly recommend that you do. And you know, despite the two first tracks being, well, two separate separate tracks, I can't really see myself listening to them separately. Honestly, if I'm there to listen to the first one, I'm gonna stay and listen to the second one. They're both so perfect, so good. I enjoy them so much on a personal level that I just want to listen to them both back to back whenever I can. And then we arrive to the B-side. Now I'm gonna say my disclaimer up front, this is the lesser side. Now saying that, it doesn't mean it's a bad side, it's not even mediocre, it's not even good, it's actually quite close to perfect. And honestly, comparing it to most of what I hear on this series, it's definitely amazing. The third track on here, the first one on the B-side, is called A Coat. At least that's what I think it's called because it's in French and I don't really know. But this track to me felt like it was a little bit too drawn out, but honestly very fun, and I think it featured one of the things that this album does greatest. Eskaton have this way of building up music through layers. Now what I mean by that is they basically add and subtract layers in order to create music and to shift it and morph it into new things. Now what I mean by that is they literally go ahead and start off with a beat, and then they add some melody, some backing vocals, some rhythm, some who knows, whatever, and then they subtract some of that and add something new, and the music kind of shifts its way through gradually, and I really like how they utilize it on this entire album, but this song in particular is the primest example of it. And yes, there are some points where this album takes a 180 turn all of the sudden, but honestly whenever it's done, it's really fitting and I really like it. But usually the way that this album goes is by shifting sounds in a very gradual way that is very homogeneous and very fun to listen to. And the last track is called Pitay, at least that's what I think it's called because I don't know French. Now this one honestly could have been very great. It has a lot of potential in it, but the thing is it does really do this kind of build up that really, you know, works upon itself and builds up a lot of sounds and a lot of interesting ideas that you're waiting for them to be resolved, only for them to, you know, let's say climax in a really odd way that I don't really get. But honestly, this song never really gets to the high point that it really needs and deserves, and that's why it was a bit anticlimactic for me. So yeah, when listening to this last track, I suddenly realized what was missing. I realized the thing that, you know, Zeuhl needed but didn't have on this album, and I was really surprised that they actually managed to create some pretty perfect tracks without this. And of course what I mean by that is brass instruments. There are none on here, maybe a flute here and there, I'm not entirely sure, but honestly there is no saxophones, there is no trombones, there is no trumpets, none of that things that you usually find on Magma and other Zeuhl bands. You don't see them here, and I think that adding brass instruments to this album, not in an obtrusive way, not in a way that would really overshadow the music, just in a very subtle way, something like Atom Heart Mother, yes I said it, like Atom Heart Mother would have done fantastic for this album. And honestly, I don't know if I could have comprehended it if it was so great. But yeah, they didn't, and what can you do? I don't know. It's a pretty perfect album. I see myself coming to the A side quite a bunch of times, and the B side is also pretty great, but it isn't the selling point for this album. So looking at this cover, I think the main thing that really pops into mind is the fact that it's very non-suggestive. Like, I can't really tell myself what this cover is supposed to be or what type of music it represents. Honestly, if you asked me what type of music would I find on an album with this type of cover, I would say that maybe like space rock experimental, but that would be a stretch. I wouldn't really imagine this would be a cover for a Zeuhl album, and honestly I can't really tell you what a cover for a Zeuhl album looks like, but this is not what I would expect. And maybe it's because some of it is really calm and it's not too obtrusive and it doesn't really render anything that's too exciting. And as I've known by far, Zeuhl is very exciting, very all over the place, but this album proved me differently, and maybe this cover should prove the same point as well. But honestly, this cover is pretty cool. I like the fact that it uses this one shade of teal going from black to, you know, the whitest it can go, and it really does look kind of nice. The imagery, to me at least, looks like there's some sort of a spaceship with the eye, and then you have some celestial bodies hovering over a grid of a city. And if you told me anything, I'd say that this would be a great replacement cover for Alan Parsons' The Eye in the Sky. So as you might have already understood, this album has the potential of being a 10 out of 10 album, but because of its B-side, which is overall weaker yet still pretty great, I think that the right rating for this album would have to be a 9 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Enigmatic by Czesław Niemann. As always, I want to thank my lovely supporter on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Walnum. You are the best. And if you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.